Hello! Entertainment media and the good life, an analysis and a Christian response. Thanks for joining in for this session. I'm Margunn, as you have seen on the introduction, living in Kristiansand, Norway with my husband Lars, working at NLA University College as an associate professor, as well as being the team and production director in Damaris, Norway. As is the case for every session, I'll do my best to make this short and sweet and still meaningful. How are you? Happy? Living a good life in the midst of the pandemic? I trust that you do, in the real sense of what a good life is all about and what happiness is all about. Quite understandably, articles, debates, podcasts, research all over the world focus on COVID-19 and the good life. And it is, of course, a highly significant aspect in the most recent annual survey on happiness, powered by data from the Gallup World Poll. And it's quite ironic that amongst all the postponements due to the pandemic, we also find this very conference on what's in a good life in my hometown, which hopefully will take place in June 22 instead. My paper is to be linked to our topic today, by the way. What is in a good life? What is a good life, really? A universal question being addressed from different angles and for different age groups, here aimed for teaching kids by the BBC. Why? Because kids, just as you and me, get so many images of what a good life is all about from the media. Images, impressions just underneath the surface in the stories, often related to wealth, fame and happiness, as we see powered or pointed out here. What about Disney, for example? Providing kids all over the world with key messages such as my dreams and my will, be kind, be true to yourself. Follow your own heart, don't give up, you'll get a reward, have courage, have faith, you deserve to be happy. Sometimes spoken out clearly, but usually we have to listen more carefully to take notice. But the messages are there, all related to a good life. Some of them to be confirmed, others to be challenged. And what about these lyrics? 21st Century Girl, sung by Willow Smith, age 11 at the time. What does a beautiful life look like from this perspective? A life of independence. No boundaries, no rules seem to be important in a happy life. And this longing for happiness is the running theme in so many stories in movies, literature, music, television series, and so on. It might not meet us up front just immediately, as in this well-known movie, The Pursuit of Happiness, starring Willow's father and brother, by the way, based on a true story about a homeless salesman in San Francisco becoming a highly successful businessman. The story seems to point out one of the ancient classical stories retold by Socrates called The Choice of Heracles or Hercules. A story about young Hercules who wants happiness and who is offered a choice between vice and virtue, between a life of pleasure or one of hardship and honor. The old philosopher underlines that we are all pursuing happiness. That is the hoped for destination in everyone's road, whether we choose vice or virtue. And this pursuit is definitely there from the very outset of this movie. But the theme is there in stories that capture our imagination regardless of our choice of platform. Powerful stories, whether they are wonderful or disturbing. Storytelling is the most powerful way to put ideas into the world today, says the famous storyteller Robert McKee. So, whatever genre or platform, all kinds of stories teach, whether the storyteller intends them to or not, to quote the author Philip Pullman. So, when faced with messages from entertainment media, we might ask ourselves, what are we taught about happiness, about the good life? To figure out, ask yourself, what do the characters long for? Where do they search? What do they hope for? And what seems to be part of the answer? The movie Eat, Pray, Love with Julia Roberts, based on the best-selling novel by Elizabeth Gilbert, makes a good start for anyone who is not used to watching movies with these glasses on. After a divorce, the major character Liz asks, in the midst of her depression, what's the point in life? She runs away from everything and embarks on a journey across the world, searching for happiness and fulfillment. The film portrays her quest for self-discovery. In her travels. She discovers the pleasure of nourishment by eating in Italy, the power of prayer in India, and finally, and unexpectedly, peace and balance in love in Indonesia. The movie received mixed reviews and critics, and many of them found it superficial, but still it was a huge success, appealing to the public. Why? I think the main reason being that it resonates with deep universal longings that we can identify with. But what about the answers provided for us? Liz seems to find the gospel of self-fulfillment, a gospel that is widespread today. And none of us are immune towards the messages surrounding us. And honestly, to many of us, it might be a real struggle personally to relate to them in a proper way. But that is what we are called to do. That is what John Stott calls double listening to the Word and to the world. He says, these voices will often contradict one another, but our purpose is listening to them both in discovering how they can relate to each other. Double listening is indispensable to Christian discipleship and Christian mission. And as Christ's disciples, we are sent into the world, which includes a call to identify views of happiness and the good life held by people around us and told in the entertainment media, and then tell a better story. Broadly speaking, there are two predominant myths about the good life that circulate throughout Western society, and both are found in entertainment media. The first myth positions the life of excess as the good life, the belief in happiness and fulfillment through technology, the availability and acquisition of wealth and possessions, upward social mobility, and political influence. And the second myth is the life of simplicity as the good life, the belief that happiness and fulfillment are found in a life of simplicity, one with a minimum of possessions, a life that does not seek wealth or influence, but finds joy in connection to nature and service to others. We meet these myths in different shapes in media messages that constantly surround us, and of course they can even impact us on a subliminal level. So there is reason to believe that these myths have significant impact on our thoughts and our opinions. And both myths link happiness and the good life together, a link that is by no way new. As it happened though, when it moves from happiness as being good, living a good life in the sense that we do good things, it has moved to looking at happiness as emotional, feeling good, and in that way live a good life. Just briefly, happiness related to being good was used to translate the Greek eudaimonia and is still used in virtue ethics. Eum meaning good and daimon meaning spirit. Today though, the meaning of happiness is more slippery, related to the Norse hap, which means chance or luck, and leads to a metric of feeling good. And that, of course, is what we see so much of in today's entertainment media and in today's culture at large. We crave for happiness. It's high up on the agenda in society from different viewpoints. Just as an illustration, 10 years back, Gretchen Rubin came on the scene with this book, The Happiness Project, which turned out as a bestseller and quickly became a movement. And it ought not come as a surprise to us that the most popular course ever at Yale University is Psychology and the Good Life from 2018, and that yet another free online version started last week. An interesting heading this, don't you think? Happiness and/or the good life. It's the title of a lecture linked to this course given by Professor Santos, together with Professor Hurd from Divinity and Religious Studies and Professor Kagan from Philosophy. And of course, they refer to the view of happiness as feel good. A good life is a rich mixture of emotions, not just happiness alone, says Professor Santos. We need to stop pursuing happiness and reach for the good life, says Professor Hurt, stressing, for instance, that different things make different people happy, and that the direct pursuit of happiness is self-defeating. Finally, a successful life is an ethical life, according to Professor Kagan. He points out that happiness is not the important metric by which we should judge our lives. Rather, he sees an ethical life as a successful life, with key elements as love, respect, achievements, friendship, knowledge, self-understanding, and morality. So, how to build a bridge from the biblical worldview to these viewpoints? That is, how to practice double listening, and how to confirm as well as challenge. Personally, I find an integrating worldview approach to be of great help. Building on James Sayer's significant worldview definition, a worldview is a commitment, a fundamental orientation of the heart that can be expressed as a story or in a set of presuppositions, assumptions which may be true, partially true, or entirely false, which we hold consciously or subconsciously, consistently or inconsistently about the basic constitution of reality, and that provides the foundation on which we live and move and have our being. This provides us with a very useful tool, taking notice of what can actually be observed, what's going on, what's being said and done in the stories, and thus what pointers can be identified to underlying worldviews by identifying certain views of ethical values, humanity, reality, and faith, meaning where we find meaning, where to put our trust. For instance, what pointers can be identified in this highly popular movie, both for kids and adults, Soul, that was released last year by Pixar Disney? The story follows Joe Gardner, a middle school music teacher who seeks to reunite his soul and body after they had accidentally been separated, just before his big breakthrough as a jazz musician. "I was born to play," says Joe. He is fully convinced playing jazz is what I live for. He tells that to his mother just before the concert that he thinks will be his breakthrough, adding, "If I were to die now, my life wouldn't mean anything." So his identity seems to be fully linked to playing the piano. This is the good life, this is happiness for him. Self-realization, follow your heart, pursue happiness, the typical Disney message. I won't spoil too much if you haven't watched the movie, but just pointing out the gap between "I'm born to play" early in the movie and Joe's statement at the very end of the film, when he returns from the great before, united with his body, being back in life. Then the only thing he's sure of is that he's going to live every minute. This film is about broadening the idea of a singular focus to thinking more widely about what life has to offer and what we have to offer life, says the director Pete Docter. And the movie definitely encourages us to look up, look around, enjoy relationships, nature, beauty, life, and thereby the movie opposes the individualism of today. There are lots of pointers that career, achievements, money, etc. is sort of meaningless. And the character 22 in particular illustrates the fight against nihilism. Everything is meaningless, and the answer in the film seems quite clear to me. Make a choice, open up, realize that life in itself is the meaning in life. That seems to be the spark that character 22 searched for, and that for so long held her back from coming to our world. But from a biblical perspective, we notice that the movie doesn't give any reasons for finding happiness and meaning by opening up towards life. God has created the universe, clothed it in meaning which can be found by anyone, providing hope. And further, the Bible tells us why relationships are important. But the fact that Soul points to both the joy and the importance of relationships is a wonderful serve to us, to point to the source for the deepest joy, the deepest happiness and meaning found in the relationship with God, our Father. So we have just got illustration now of at least 2 out of 8 very common answers to the question about what makes me happy, what makes a good life: performances and relationships. The other 6 being image, possessions, experiences, explorations, sexual and spiritual, and self-determination. So what about us? We are by no means immune. As Tim Keller reminds us here, if anything becomes more fundamental than God to your happiness, meaning in life and identity, then it is an idol. This profound statement by Keller is inspired by the Reformers, by Luther and Calvin. And Martin Luther wrote, "Whatever your heart clings to and confides in, that is really your God." So the Reformers based this on the Old Testament prophets' critique of idolatry and on Paul's teaching in his letters and his approach in Acts. And this leads us to what we may call the Acts 17 model, identifying and utilizing points of contact and continuity between the biblical worldview and what's being communicated in the messages surrounding us, as well as identifying and challenging points of tension and discontinuity, just as Paul did in Athens, in the marketplace before the Areopagus Council. Short and sweet, I said in the beginning, which means that we'll just point to very few examples here relating to what seems to be revealed underneath the surface, focusing on image, performances, relationships, possessions, experiences, personal explorations, and self-determination, namely deep longings for true identity, real community, deep joy, and authentic freedom. And here I use the image of the open hand. When talking about media stories, it's important to affirm these deep longings and go from there to the invitation to explore how a holistic biblical worldview fulfills these longings. For instance, when Jessie J screams, "Just be true to who you are," seemingly opposing to the pressure on presenting oneself with a certain image. I nearly left the real me on the shelf. Don't lose who you are in the blur of the stars. Seeing is deceiving, dreaming is believing. It's okay not to be okay. Sometimes it's hard to follow your heart. Tears don't mean you're losing. Everybody's bruising. Just be true to who you are. In social media, young girls are thanking Jessie for helping them out of depression by underlying this fact that they are good enough and that hurting is part of life, really. And just a couple of such responses. "I love this song," one says. "It's extremely relevant in today's youth and society. Being true to who you are and not hiding into the labels everyone expects you to follow is how everyone should live their life. Just because it hurts do not mean that it's something bad. It just means you're living life." I struggle with depression, and this song helped me to be more myself and not let what other thinks of me get to my emotions. A longing for true identity behind the image, that is. As in the long-running Grey's Anatomy series, now on Disney Plus Star, the opening sequence. No one believes their life will turn out just kind of okay. We all think we are going to be great. And from the day we decide to become surgeons, we are filled with expectations. Expectations of the trials we will blaze, the people we will help, the difference we will make. Great expectations of who we will be, where we will go. And then we get there. The dream is this, that we'll finally be happy when we reach our goals. So the question is, do they find happiness? An analysis of this series done by a colleague of mine showed the tension between relationships and the focus on performances regarding where to anchor their identity and where to find meaning in life. And what about the song "Lonely" by Justin Bieber? What if you had it all but nobody to call? Maybe then you'd know me. because I've had everything. The need for real community is evident. Further, the list of videos marked by #lonely and different synonyms just make us cry. #lonely 1.5 million. I'm lonely and loneliness 200 million. Alone and alone life 2.8, 2.3 billion. And the artist Beneath got her international breakthrough on TikTok with the song Super Lonely, sad song with the Kings. As for Billie Eilish, the queen of Gen Z, who struggles with feelings of isolation and chooses to be open about this in her lyrics. She often refers to dreams in her songs, and here she refers to a nightmare. She and her brother wrote the song because she had had this dream that she killed herself and nobody cared, neither family nor fans. But the silver lining here is that she actually has her big brother by her side to help her when times are tough. The longing for fellowship. Television series for tweens portray this over and over again. The first time I remember hearing the phrase, "we'll be our own family," was in Dawson's Creek in the late 90s when analyzing the series. It's still popular, now on Netflix. And of course, Friends illustrates this very well and has got a comeback now, being highly popular among today's tweens. And most teenage series are in the same line. But at the same time, there is a tendency towards appreciating the extended nuclear family, as in Modern Family. Still, I wonder, who are the authorities? Most often, the younger generation. So what is joy all about? What's happiness? Russell Brand puts it like this. You start to realize that other forms of happiness are temporary, conditional, transient, illusory forms of happiness. Sexy happiness, druggy happiness, new jacket happiness. Brand said this in an interview after meeting with Dalai Lama in 2012, talking about spiritual quest in life and how meditation gives the proper happiness. Scum, then, the Norwegian teen drama television series about the daily life of high school teenagers in Oslo, could in itself serve as illustration for a lot of aspects related to our topic. The series became an international success that took NRK, Norwegian public broadcaster, by surprise. I highly recommend, by the way, that you find my colleague Anne Solfrid Brenhov's lecture on Scum at Focal Online. Each season here has focused on particular topics ranging from relationship difficulties, identity, eating disorders, sexual assault, homosexuality, mental health issues, religion, and forbidden love. And of course, the very title, Scum or Shame, points to an underlying longing for authentic freedom, which is one of the key longings that can be identified in entertainment media in different ways. The characters struggle with feeling shameful, not guilty, but shameful. As with Eve, feeling shameful about her loneliness when looking at social media, as well as when getting low grades, as illustrated here, where she has got a low mark on an essay on guilt, Norwegian skyld, but she lies about it. Quite ironic, on guilt, because shame is the issue, not guilt, and how to be set free from shame. The key longings for true identity, real community, deep joy and authentic freedom all reflect underlying perspectives and traces of worldviews, of course. And not the least, we find consumerism and materialism, individualism and subjectivism. And of course, it's so important to listen carefully to the longings underneath and to reach out with the image of an open hand. But there's also a need for challenging contemporary views and lifestyles of happiness and the underlying idolatry from the perspective of the biblical gospel. The Kardashians, for instance, symbolize the importance of image, performances, success, belongings, as well as family and relationships for happiness and a good life. Do we actually deal with these underlying perspectives in our teaching? As with Disney, in the midst of all the good values that are to be cherished and confirmed, it's all about me, my dreams, my will. When you wish upon a star, your dreams come true. The Disney Bible has but one verse, says Mark Pinsky, and that is it. What then is a biblical perspective on the good life? It might be summarized in three key expressions, I think. The image of God, we have been created with dignity to reflect God's goodness. The indwelling love of Christ, we have come to Christ in faith, receiving forgiveness for sins and called to love God and others. And thirdly, the imitation of Christ, we are called to a life of purpose and service, reflecting the goodness of Christ. In his book, Discovering the Good Life, Tim Savage points out that Christians and non-Christians alike experience dashed dreams, ruined relationships, failures, regrets, and discouragement. Faced with all this, a distinctly Christian vision of the good life is being in Christ. This is the most liberating and fulfilling experience any human could have. Anyhow, the author points out that the indwelling Christ is our blind spot as Christians. But the good news is that there is more. It can be found not in the things of this world, not in science or nature or possessions or money or religion or pleasure, but in Jesus Christ. Nothing else will satisfy our heart. Works of self-giving love in a self-grasping world are supernatural works. They are miracles, and they are symptomatic of the Christian life. And finally, from Savage, when we become bearers of Christ's love, we become beacons of Christ's love. When we experience Christ's love, we exhibit Christ's love. Love cannot be held in. It is like a river in flood, bursting its banks, like a pent-up geyser blowing its top. Love cascades out of the Christian and into the lives of others. What an encouragement and what a challenge when facing the mixed messages about happiness and a good life in entertainment media. As disciples and witnesses in this culture, we are invited to experience the love of Christ and called to share his love and to reflect the goodness of Christ in our lives through the power of the Holy Spirit. Tim Savage's book is worth reading, by the way. To quote Tim Keller, the book is ultimately an apologetic for the Christian life in response to a culture dedicated to seeking personal fulfillment, but finding that the very thing is more and more elusive. That is, in the deepest sense, the Christian response to discovering the good life. Thanks again for joining. Wishing you God's rich blessings where you are.